At my sister-in-law wedding, my mother laughed into the microphone. She told a room full of high society guests that I was not married, but I was definitely good for a check. Everyone roared with laughter. My name was not even printed in the wedding program. I was just the sponsor. So I walked up to the stage, took the microphone, and canceled the entire wedding right in front of them. Before I dive into exactly how I shut down a $250,000 celebration, let me know where you are watching from in the comments right below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to put a toxic family member in their proper place. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. For my entire life, I have been the invisible workhorse of my family. I am a proud Black woman who built an immense hospitality and real estate empire from absolutely nothing. But to my mother, Brenda, I was always viewed as just an endless bank account carefully designed to fund the lavish lifestyle of her precious golden boy, my 34-year-old brother, Marcus. Today was originally supposed to be his absolute crowning achievement. He was marrying Victoria Sterling, a 28-year-old white woman whose family aggressively projected a very fake old money aesthetic. The extravagant wedding cost $250,000. The selected venue was a breathtaking historic estate, complete with crystal chandeliers, rare imported orchids, and a live string quartet playing classical music softly in the warm background. Despite funding virtually the entire expensive spectacle, I was seated far away at table 14. It was arguably the worst possible seat, hidden in the very dark back corner, squeezed right next to the swinging kitchen doors, where the busy waitstaff constantly rushed in and out. I did not even receive a +1 invitation. I sat there quietly in my carefully chosen formal dress, watching Marcus and Victoria sit on literal thrones at the gorgeous head table. The Sterling family occupied the prime tables surrounding them, dripping in bright diamonds and inherited arrogance. When it was finally time for the evening toasts, my mother quickly grabbed the microphone. Brenda always loved having a captive audience. She proudly stood up wearing her expensive designer silk evening gown, an outfit I personally paid for, and began to loudly sing Marcus' praises. She went on and on for minutes about how utterly brilliant he was, calling him a visionary technology leader and a boldly trailblazing entrepreneur. I simply took a very slow sip of my iced water. Marcus was certainly not an executive. He was merely an empty figurehead, living entirely on my hard-earned dime, but Brenda would much rather pass away than ever publicly admit that a female was the singular breadwinner of our entire family. Then Brenda dramatically turned her sharp gaze toward the back of the crowded room. She blatantly squinted through the bright event spotlights, pointing directly at my isolated table by the busy kitchen doors. A cruel, smug smirk slowly spread completely across her face. "And then there is Maya," she cheerfully announced, making sure her voice powerfully echoed through the massive ballroom speakers. Maya might honestly be far too stubborn and difficult to ever catch a husband, but let us all give her a big round of applause, because at least she is always good for a check. The heavy dead silence that immediately followed lasted for only a quick second before the entire white side of the room joyfully erupted into booming laughter. Victoria, wealthy father. Charles chuckled incredibly loudly, playfully raising his crystal champagne glass mockingly in my clear direction. My very own biological mother had effortlessly reduced my entire successful existence, my relentless, brutal hard work, and my immense financial generosity to a cheap punchline about being a sad, desperate automatic teller machine for her favorite child. My face burned deeply with profound humiliation, but I kept my sitting posture absolutely straight. Victoria clearly thought this was the absolute perfect moment to join the ongoing abuse. She eagerly snatched the microphone directly from Brenda, delicately smoothing the front of her designer lace wedding gown. She leaned closely into the cold metal microphone with a sickly sweet smile that absolutely did not reach her blue eyes. "Thank you so very much for kindly skipping meals just to chip in, Maya," she loudly cooed into the buzzing speaker system. "We truly appreciate your cute little contribution to our magical big day." Please do not worry yourself too much about the fancy catering menu, though, because we made sure to secretly save some cheap leftover vegan sliders specifically for you in the back kitchen. More cruel laughter immediately rippled violently through the packed room. Victoria Public comments were not just casually mean, they were heavily loaded with toxic racial and blatant class microaggressions. She genuinely viewed me as the poor, uncultured sister who had pathetically scraped together mere pennies just to be permitted in the majestic presence of the elite Sterling family. She had absolutely no idea that her seemingly perfect aristocratic dream wedding was fully bankrolled by the very black woman she was currently mocking. I firmly looked over at Marcus. My older brother simply looked down at his expensive silver watch, pretending he did not notice what his awful wife and mother were doing. That exact second marked the final moment my family loyalty completely snapped. I slowly stood up from the table. I calmly smoothed down my elegant dress and marched straight toward the stage. The guests stared silently as I boldly snatched the microphone away from Victoria. Speaking of checks, I announced loud and clear over the massive speakers, I actually own this entire luxury estate, and since you are so thoroughly ungrateful, I am officially canceling this entire event right now. Get out of my building right this minute. The heavy silence in the ballroom shattered into absolute chaos the second those words left my mouth. A collective gasp echoed from the Sterling family tables. A woman dropped her crystal champagne flute, and the glass shattered sharply against the marble floor. Victoria stood completely frozen in her designer gown. Her mouth hung open in shock, while Marcus frantically looked around as if waiting for someone to announce this was a prank. It was not a prank. The general manager of the estate immediately signaled his staff. The soft classical music abruptly cut off. The harsh overhead maintenance lights flickered on, replacing the romantic dim lighting with a blinding glare. Charles Sterling recovered from his shock and his face turned a furious shade of red. He stormed toward the stage, pushing past the confused waitstaff. He pulled his cell phone from his tailored tuxedo pocket with trembling hands. "You have lost your mind," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "I am calling the police chief. He is a personal friend of mine and my golfing partner. You are going to be arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. You cannot just barge into a private high society event and make these psychotic claims." He placed the phone to his ear and loudly demanded that the local police chief send officers immediately to handle a hostile intruder. Charles stood tall and proud, fully expecting his wealth and his status to easily handle a black woman who dared to ruin his daughter and her perfect day. Before the police even arrived, Marcus finally snapped out of his silent panic. He aggressively marched up the stage steps and cornered me near the podium. He ripped his leather wallet open and shoved his corporate identification badge directly into my face. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Marcus Innovations," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperate rage. "I am the one who rented this entire facility. You are nothing but my jealous accountant sister. You have spent your entire life being bitter, because I am the success story of this family, while you sit alone in a tiny apartment." My mother. Brenda pushed her way onto the stage right behind him. Her eyes were wide with sheer panic as she looked at the wealthy white guests murmuring in the crowd. She raised her hand and swung it aggressively toward my face, attempting to slap me. I easily caught her wrist midair and firmly pushed her hand away. "How dare you embarrass us like this?" Brenda hissed, pulling her arm back. "You are an absolute disgrace to black families everywhere. We are finally sitting at the table with polite high-class society, and you decide to act like a wild animal. You are ruining your brother and his hard-earned luxury lifestyle because you are a bitter spinster." I looked at my mother and brother. Marcus was claiming to be a brilliant chief executive officer, but the truth was that Marcus Innovations was simply a shell subsidiary company belonging entirely to my massive corporate holding group. I gave him a fake title and a massive salary purely because Brenda begged me to give him a job after he failed out of his third business venture. He was a figurehead employee, existing solely on my charity. Red and blue emergency lights suddenly flashed brightly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the ballroom. Several police officers rushed through the grand entrance doors led by the local police chief. Charles Sterling immediately walked over to greet them with a smug, victorious smile. He shook the chief and his hand and pointed straight at me. "Chief, thank you for coming so quickly," Charles announced loudly. "This woman is an unhinged former employee of my son-in-law. She is causing a massive disturbance and refusing to leave my daughter and her wedding. Please arrest her and remove her from the premises." The police chief nodded and walked toward the stage, resting his hand on his duty belt. Marcus stood tall next to Victoria, trying to look like the wealthy patriarch protecting his new bride. Brenda crossed her arms, looking at me with pure disgust, eager to watch me be taken away in handcuffs. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned to my general manager, who had just walked up the stage steps, holding a thick leather legal binder. I took the binder and handed it directly to the police chief, along with a stack of corporate credit card receipts. "Officer," I said clearly and calmly, "you are currently standing inside the Magnolia Estate Resort. If you look at the deed of ownership in that binder, you will see this property is wholly owned by Maya Washington, Hospitality Group. I am Maya Washington. I am the sole legal owner of this entire multi-million-dollar estate. Furthermore, those receipts show that the deposit for this specific event was paid using my personal corporate card because the groom secretly used my company operating funds to finance his wedding. I have officially canceled the event and revoked my financial sponsorship." The police chief opened the heavy binder. His eyes scanned the certified legal documents, the property deeds, and the matching identification card I handed him. The arrogant smile completely vanished from Charles Sterling, and his face as he watched his golfing buddy turn pale. The chief closed the binder and respectfully handed it back to me. He cleared his throat and turned to face Charles. "Victoria and Marcus." The entire room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "Mr. Sterling?" The police chief said, his voice tight with extreme discomfort. "These documents are completely verified. Miss Washington is the legal property owner and the primary financial sponsor of this event. Since she has officially canceled the gathering, you no longer have any legal right to be on these premises. Please gather your belongings and leave right now immediately." The heavy oak doors of the Magnolia Estate Resort slammed shut with a definitive thud. Outside, the humid evening air had suddenly turned bitterly cold, and the dark clouds that had been threatening all afternoon finally burst open. A torrential downpour began to hammer down on the 300 wealthy guests who had just been unceremoniously escorted off the property by the local police. I stood perfectly dry under the heated portico of my estate, with my arms crossed, watching the absolute chaos unfold in the grand circular parking lot. Victoria was having a complete breakdown. The pouring rain instantly flattened her elaborate bridal updo, pasting wet blonde hair against her cheeks. Her custom-imported lace wedding gown was dragging through muddy puddles, absorbing dirty water like a giant sponge. Her waterproof mascara was failing miserably, leaving dark streaks running down her face. She stomped her expensive satin heels in the water, shrieking at the top of her lungs. She demanded that someone do something immediately. She screamed that her perfect day was ruined, looking frantically at her father for a solution. Charles Sterling stood nearby, trying to shield his tailored tuxedo with a useless silk pocket square. His face was contorted with a mixture of sheer panic and racist outrage. He loudly complained to his wealthy associates that it was an absolute travesty for prominent citizens to be treated like common street criminals. He glared in my direction, muttering under his breath about how giving people like me a little bit of money always results in a complete lack of class. He demanded that Marcus take control of the situation and get his daughter out of the freezing rain. Victoria violently shoved Marcus in the chest. She shrieked that he needed to whisk her away to the $4 million honeymoon mansion he had supposedly purchased for them. She yelled that she refused to stand in a public parking lot like a homeless person for one more second. She commanded him to bring the car around instantly so they could escape this ghetto nightmare I had orchestrated out of pure spite. Instead of apologizing, Marcus puffed out his chest, trying desperately to regain his shattered masculine pride in front of his white in-laws. He smoothed the lapels of his soaking wet tuxedo jacket and shot me a look of pure venom. He confidently reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy silver key fob to his sleek black Bentley. He held it up high for the entire crowd to see, acting as if the luxury vehicle was the ultimate proof of his unquestionable success. My mother Brenda saw this as her perfect opportunity to defend her golden child. She stood under a small umbrella she had snatched from a frightened bridesmaid and pointed a shaking finger directly at me. Her voice easily cut through the sound of the pouring rain. She screamed that I was nothing but a bitter, lonely spinster who was deliberately trying to tear down a successful black man simply because no one would ever love me. She yelled to the crowd that Marcus had worked his fingers to the bone to build his incredible technology empire. She claimed he had earned every single penny of his luxury lifestyle through sheer brilliance. I did not flinch. I simply watched my mother passionately defend a man who was entirely funded by the very daughter she was currently insulting. Marcus clicked the unlock button on the key fob. The Bentley headlights flashed brightly in the dark parking lot, drawing admiring gasps from some of the stranded guests. Marcus wrapped his arm protectively around Victoria, promising her that they were leaving my toxic jealousy behind and heading straight to their multi-million-dollar sanctuary. Before Marcus could take another step, the loud roar of a heavy-duty diesel engine drowned out the sound of the rain. A massive yellow tow truck reversed aggressively into the circular driveway, completely blocking the sole exit path of the parking lot. The guests scrambled out of the way as the truck backed up directly in front of the gleaming black Bentley. Marcus dropped his arm from Victoria and marched furiously toward the tow truck driver. Marcus screamed that the driver was making a huge mistake, threatening to sue him into bankruptcy for touching a vehicle that belonged to a wealthy chief executive officer. He waved his key fob in the air, shouting about his rights and his power. I calmly walked out from under the dry portico, opening a large black umbrella. I approached the tow truck driver, completely ignoring my brother, who was currently having a meltdown. I handed the driver a thick stack of certified legal title documents and a signed corporate repossession order. The driver quickly inspected the paperwork with a flashlight. He looked at Marcus, then looked at the title. He announced loudly to the entire crowd that the vehicle did not belong to Marcus Innovations. He confirmed the title clearly stated the Bentley was registered and owned entirely by Maya Washington Holding Group. I turned to face my brother and my mother. I smiled warmly. I explained that since Marcus was no longer an employee of my subsidiary company, his corporate vehicle privileges were officially revoked, effective immediately. The company car was being returned to the corporate fleet. The tow truck driver swiftly attached the heavy metal hooks to the front axle of the Bentley. The loud mechanical whine of the winch lifting the luxury car into the air was the only sound in the parking lot. 300 elite guests stood in absolute silence, watching the ultimate symbol of Marcus and his fake wealth being dragged away into the dark, rainy night. Victoria let out a sound that was a mix between a sob and a scream. She looked at Marcus with wide, horrified eyes. Her perfect, wealthy groom had just lost his luxury car in front of all her high society friends. Without a car, and with all the guests eagerly fleeing the awkward scene in their own vehicles, Marcus and Victoria had absolutely no other option. I stood under my umbrella and watched with immense satisfaction as the groom, desperately trying to save face, was forced to pull out his phone and order the cheapest economy rideshare option available. They stood in the freezing rain for 20 agonizing minutes, their wedding attire completely ruined, waiting for a beat-up silver sedan to carry them away from the luxury resort they thought they owned. The beat-up silver sedan sputtered as it pulled into the winding paved driveway of the gated community. Marcus and Victoria sat shivering in the back seat, their ruined wedding attire leaving dark, wet stains on the faded upholstery. Close behind them, a sleek black town car carried my mother Brenda and Victoria wealthy father Charles, who had insisted on following the newlyweds to ensure they safely reached their lavish $4 million sanctuary. The heavy iron gates had surprisingly opened for their rideshare vehicle, which gave Marcus a temporary boost of his shattered ego. He confidently told Victoria that the estate security system recognized his presence. The truth was that I had simply instructed the night guard to let them through. I wanted them to reach the front door. The two vehicles parked in front of the massive three-story modern mansion. The storm had finally reduced to a steady, cold drizzle. Marcus stepped out of the economy car and quickly paid the driver, adjusting his soaking wet tuxedo jacket. He offered his hand to Victoria, who gingerly stepped onto the immaculate stone driveway, holding up the muddy, heavy layers of her ruined designer lace gown. Brenda and Charles stepped out of their town car, holding large umbrellas. Charles looked up at the stunning architectural masterpiece with a nod of approval. He loudly commented that Marcus had the proper taste to invest in prime real estate. Brenda puffed out her chest, beaming with pride. She announced that her brilliant son always knew how to secure the finest things in life. Marcus marched up the wide marble steps leading to the towering mahogany front doors. He pulled a digital key fob from his pocket and pressed it against the glowing smart lock panel. A red light flashed, followed by a loud buzzing sound. Marcus frowned and tried again. The light flashed a second time. Victoria shivered in the cold, asking him to hurry up because she was freezing. Marcus muttered under his breath and punched a 6-digit passcode directly into the touchscreen. The system beeped, reading access denied. Panic began to flash across his face. Marcus pounded his heavy fist against the solid mahogany door. He violently shook the brass handle, screaming that the system was malfunctioning. He yelled to Charles and Brenda that his bitter sister Maya must have hired someone to hack his personal smart home network out of pure jealousy. He claimed I was a cyber terrorist trying to ruin his wedding night because I could not stand seeing a successful black man own a $4 million estate. Brenda immediately agreed, shouting into the cold night air that I was a criminal and that she would personally see me locked in prison for tampering with her son and his hard-earned property. Suddenly, the massive exterior floodlights illuminated the entire property, turning the dark yard as bright as day. The glass doors on the second-floor master balcony slid open. I stepped out onto the marble terrace wearing silk pajamas and a warm cashmere robe. I leaned against the glass railing, holding a steaming mug of freshly brewed coffee. I looked down at the pathetic soaking wet group gathered on the front steps. Marcus froze. He pointed a shaking finger up at the balcony, screaming at the top of his lungs. He demanded to know how I broke into his house. He yelled that he was the rightful owner and that he was going to sue me for breaking and entering. He promised Charles that he would have me arrested immediately for violating his private sanctuary. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. I looked directly down into his desperate, panicked eyes. I firmly told Marcus that he was making a massive fool of himself in front of his new father-in-law. I explained very clearly that he could not arrest the legal owner of the property for standing on her own balcony. Charles Sterling stepped forward, his face contorted with confusion. He loudly stated that Marcus had purchased this house 3 months ago with a massive down payment. I laughed out loud. The sound of my laughter echoed sharply against the stone walls of the mansion. I looked at Charles and delivered the absolute truth. I explained that Marcus never bought anything. He signed a highly inflated lease agreement. Furthermore, I revealed that Marcus had been secretly using my corporate operating funds to pay the massive monthly rent to maintain his fake billionaire lifestyle. I told them that when my forensic accountants caught the unauthorized wire transfers last week, I did not just freeze his accounts. I contacted the actual owner of the property and purchased the entire mortgage debt in cash. I became his landlord, and since Marcus used stolen corporate funds to pay his rent, his lease was immediately rendered fraudulent and void. I gestured with my coffee mug toward the dark corner of the expansive front porch. I told Marcus to look to his left. He slowly turned his head. Stacked neatly next to a large marble planter were 6 cheap black plastic garbage bags. I explained that I had legally processed his eviction that very morning. My security team had packed up all his cheap cologne, his fake designer watches, and his luxury streetwear. Everything he actually owned in this world was sitting right there in the trash, where it belonged. Victoria let out a horrifying shriek, realizing she had just married a man who did not even own a home. Charles Sterling stumbled backward, completely breathless. The arrogant patriarch began to sweat profusely in the cold rain. He stared at Marcus with absolute disgust. He finally realized his new son-in-law was totally broke. Victoria grabbed her father by the arm, weeping uncontrollably. She demanded that Charles do something to fix this nightmare immediately. Brenda screamed up at the balcony, demanding I open the heavy mahogany doors. I turned my back on my mother, who was screaming furiously from the wet driveway, and walked back into my warm bedroom. I slid the heavy glass doors shut, locking out the noise of their pathetic meltdowns. Down below in the freezing rain, Marcus and his new bride were left shivering next to his cheap garbage bags. My mother Brenda was not about to let her precious relationship with the wealthy white Sterling family completely disintegrate right there on the pavement. She quickly ordered another rideshare vehicle using her phone. She desperately shoved Charles and Victoria into the cramped back seat, promising them that this was merely a temporary misunderstanding. She loudly claimed that I was just throwing a childish tantrum because I had always been insanely jealous of her. Golden Boy Brenda directed the driver to take them straight to the most expensive 5-star luxury hotel in the downtown district. She wanted to prove to Charles that her son was still a powerful tech executive with unlimited resources. She needed to maintain the fake facade that our family truly belonged in high society, no matter what it cost. The beat-up silver sedan pulled up to the glowing entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel. The dripping wet wedding party stumbled into the pristine marble lobby, drawing shocked stares from the elegantly dressed guests. Victoria was sobbing uncontrollably into her ruined lace gown, leaving a trail of dirty water on the immaculate floor. Charles was pacing back and forth, furiously muttering about how his prominent old money family had never been so thoroughly humiliated. Brenda marched straight up to the polished mahogany front desk, projecting an air of ultimate superiority to hide her panic. She slapped a heavy platinum corporate credit card down on the marble counter. She spoke very loudly, making sure Charles could hear every single word she said. She boasted to the receptionist that her brilliant son Marcus had endless credit and that he always took exceptional care of his family. She proudly announced that Marcus was simply experiencing a minor banking error caused by a jealous former employee. She demanded their finest penthouse suite to immediately accommodate her new high society in-laws. Charles crossed his arms, looking slightly appeased by the sight of the platinum card. He genuinely believed that the Black family he allowed his daughter to marry into still had some financial leverage left. The front desk receptionist offered a polite customer service smile and picked up the platinum card. She swiped it through the credit card reader. The machine let out a sharp negative beep. The receptionist frowned slightly and tried sliding the card again. Another sharp beep echoed through the quiet luxury lobby. The screen flashed a bright red warning. Reading transaction declined. Brenda scoffed loudly, telling the receptionist that her machine must be broken because that card had a limit of $100,000. She commanded the young woman to type the numbers in manually. The receptionist carefully typed the long string of numbers into the computer system. The result was exactly the same. She looked up at my mother with an expression of deep pity. "I am so sorry, ma'am, but this card has been completely deactivated by the issuing corporate bank," she explained. Charles let out a loud gasp of pure horror. Victoria buried her face in her hands and began to wail loudly. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the useless piece of plastic on the counter. That was the exact moment the heavy glass revolving doors of the hotel lobby smoothly pushed open. I walked into the grand room wearing a sharp-tailored suit, looking perfectly calm and collected. Right beside me was Elias, my lead corporate attorney, holding a thick stack of legal documents. My mother turned around and her jaw dropped in absolute shock. I casually walked up to the front desk and looked at the deactivated platinum card. I turned to face my mother and the horrified Sterling family. I explained very clearly that I had officially frozen every single corporate account associated with Marcus and his fake executive title. I told Brenda that her days of using my hard-earned wealth to fund her delusions of grandeur were permanently over. I officially revoked all her financial access on the spot. My lawyer Elias handed the receptionist a formal legal notice confirming that none of these people were authorized to bill anything to my holding company. Charles realized the terrifying truth that Marcus was completely broke and had absolutely nothing to his name. Brenda completely lost her mind, right there in the luxury lobby in front of everyone. She threw a massive fit screaming that I needed to know my place. She yelled that I was an ungrateful child who owed everything to her golden boy. She claimed that Marcus was the only reason our family had any status, and that I was destroying our reputation out of pure spite. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, her eyes wide with unhinged rage. She threatened that when Monday morning came, she would march straight into the corporate office and utterly destroy my entire career. She promised she would use her power as the family matriarch to make sure I lost everything I had ever built. She told Charles not to worry because she was going to fix this and put me back in my miserable place where I belonged. I simply smiled at her empty, pathetic threats. I knew Monday morning was going to be the worst day of their entire lives, and I was fully prepared to sit back and joyfully watch them entirely collapse under the crushing weight of their own profound greed, because they brought this upon themselves by trying to openly humiliate me for absolutely no valid reason other than sheer toxic jealousy and blinding arrogance, which meant they deserved absolutely zero pity from anyone, especially not from the daughter they deeply betrayed. Period. Monday morning arrived with the exact kind of desperate chaos I fully expected long before the sun even finished rising over the city skyline. Marcus was already sprinting through the glass lobby of the downtown corporate tower. He swiped his access badge with frantic shaking hands, completely ignoring the bewildered security guards at the front desk. He was sweating through a wrinkled suit he had clearly slept in, a stark contrast to his usual pristine tailored appearance. He practically kicked open the double doors of the executive suite, rushing straight toward his corner office. His singular goal was terrifyingly obvious. He needed to drain the remaining company operating funds and wire the cash to a hidden offshore account before I could officially remove him from the banking registry. He and his new bride Victoria were entirely broke, and their only desperate hope was to steal enough corporate liquidity to flee the immediate fallout of their ruined wedding weekend. Marcus slammed his briefcase onto his glass desk and aggressively powered on his desktop computer. His fingers slammed violently against the keyboard as he desperately tried to access the master payroll and vendor accounts. Several early arriving staff members stepped out of their cubicles, staring in absolute shock as their supposed chief executive officer behaved like a cornered animal. My lead financial controller, a brilliant woman named Sarah, bravely stepped into his office and gently reminded him that all major outbound wire transfers required dual authorization from the holding group. Marcus completely lost what little remained of his sanity. He aggressively slammed his fists down on the glass desk, shattering a decorative coffee mug, and began screaming at the top of his lungs. He demanded that Sarah bypass the security protocols instantly or face immediate termination. He paced back and forth across the expensive office rug, pointing his finger at the terrified employees who had gathered near the doorway. He launched into a completely unhinged, dramatic monologue meant to save his fragile ego. He loudly proclaimed that he was the sole genius founder of this entire technology enterprise. He yelled that he had built this company from a tiny startup into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse, using his own sweat and blood. He desperately spun a wild narrative claiming that I was nothing more than a predatory, aggressive venture capitalist who was actively trying to illegally seize his life work out of pure bitter jealousy. He told the frightened staff that I was a corporate vulture swooping in to steal the profits of a successful black man simply because I could not build anything of value on my own. He demanded absolute loyalty from the employees, screaming that anyone who did not help him initiate the wire transfers would be permanently blacklisted from the technology industry forever. His pathetic performance was cut short by the sharp, authoritative click of my heels against the hardwood floor. I walked straight into the executive suite flanked by my lead corporate attorney Elias and a team of 4 stern-looking forensic auditors carrying thick briefcases. The terrified staff instantly parted like the Red Sea, allowing me to walk directly into the boardroom adjacent to his office. I did not yell. I did not match his frantic, chaotic energy. I simply took a seat at the head of the long mahogany conference table and signaled for Elias to close the door behind us. Marcus marched into the boardroom, his chest puffed out, attempting one last display of false dominance. He pointed at me and demanded that I leave his building immediately. I calmly pulled my tablet from my designer bag and pressed a single button. The massive digital monitor mounted on the boardroom wall instantly flickered to life. I looked Marcus dead in the eyes and informed him that he was no longer authorized to give orders on my property. At that exact second, the master server network officially kicked him out. His desktop computer screen in the next room went entirely black, displaying a bold red padlock icon. I had completely revoked his digital access, freezing him out of every single file database and banking portal associated with my empire. Marcus let out a strangled gasp, lunging toward the conference table, but Elias stepped firmly in his path, holding up a thick legal folder. I gestured toward the glowing wall monitor. The forensic auditors had spent their entire weekend diving deep into the corporate ledgers, and what they found was worse than I had originally anticipated. I told Marcus to look at the screen. Projected in high definition for the entire room to see was a meticulously detailed spreadsheet highlighting a massive trail of unauthorized corporate expenditures. I read the numbers aloud, making sure every syllable hit him like a physical blow. He had systematically embezzled exactly $400,000 from the employee payroll reserve and marketing budgets. The screen displayed the exact receipts. He had used my corporate funds to purchase Victoria, a blindingly expensive diamond engagement ring. He used company money to charter private jets for their romantic weekend getaways. He even billed his ridiculously overpriced designer wardrobe and country club membership dues as fake business expenses. He was not a tech visionary. He was a common thief, playing dress-up with my hard-earned money. Marcus began to hyperventilate, stepping backward as the undeniable proof of his federal crimes glowed brightly on the wall. I stood up from my chair, resting my hands firmly on the polished wood table. I officially terminated his employment, effective immediately for gross misconduct and massive financial fraud. I promised him that if he ever set foot in any of my buildings again, or if he tried to contact any of my staff, I would hand this exact audit report directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and personally ensure he spent the next 20 years locked away in a small, miserable federal prison cell, reflecting upon his deeply profound, catastrophic arrogance and his pure greed. Marcus was escorted out of the building by my private security team, his loud protests echoing down the hallway. The corporate office was perfectly quiet for exactly 10 minutes before the heavy glass doors of the executive suite swung open violently. My mother Brenda stormed past the bewildered reception desk. She had somehow pushed her way past the lobby security guards by screaming that she was the mother of the chief executive officer. She marched directly into the glass boardroom where I was still sitting with my legal team. Her face was twisted with a level of frantic rage I had never witnessed before. She slammed her expensive designer handbag down on my polished mahogany table so hard that the heavy metal clasp actually chipped the beautiful wood. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my face and loudly demanded that I call down to the lobby immediately. She commanded me to bring Marcus back upstairs and restore his corporate access right this instant. She yelled that I was destroying our family over a few missing dollars. I remained perfectly still in my leather chair. I calmly reminded her that Marcus had embezzled $400,000 from my employees and that I was showing incredible mercy by not having him arrested on the spot. Brenda did not care about the law. She did not care about my employees or my business. She only cared about protecting her precious golden child. She yelled that it was my absolute duty as a Black woman to protect my older brother from the harsh justice system, regardless of his blatant crimes. She claimed that Marcus deserved that money to build a beautiful life with Victoria, and that I was just being a selfish, greedy spinster trying to ruin his happiness. She ordered Elias and the forensic auditors to leave the room instantly, attempting to assert her fake dominance in a building she did not even own. Elias looked at me for direction, his expression unreadable. I simply nodded, signaling him and the audit team to step into the hallway and close the heavy glass doors behind them. We were completely alone. Once the heavy doors clicked shut, Brenda lost all remaining restraint. She leaned over the conference table, spitting venom into my face. She screamed that I owed Marcus my entire empire. I asked her exactly why I owed my hard-earned success to a man who had never worked a single honest day in his pathetic life. I asked her why she was so obsessed with defending a common thief who used my money to impress a white family that secretly despised us. In her blinding, furious rage, Brenda made the most fatal, catastrophic, and completely irreversible mistake of her entire existence. Her face turned dark purple as she shrieked at the top of her lungs. "You owe him everything because I said so. I did not forge your dead father and his signature on that massive college trust fund just for you to turn around and ruin him now." The terrible words hung heavily in the sterile air of the silent boardroom. The devastating truth was finally out in the open. For my entire life, Brenda had told me that my father despised me. She always claimed he thought I was worthless and that he left every single penny to Marcus because Marcus was the only child worthy of his legacy. But the truth was the exact opposite. My father had actually loved me enough to secretly leave me a massive inheritance to start my life and build my business. But my own biological mother had forged the legal documents. She stole my entire future and handed every single penny over to Marcus to fund his early failed business ventures. She robbed me blind and then spent years mocking me for having to work 3 jobs to pay for my own education. She built her favorite son up, using the very foundation my father had lovingly prepared for me. I did not break down in tears. I did not scream or fall to the floor in overwhelming grief. Instead, I slowly reached into the deep pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a small black digital voice recorder and set it gently on the glass surface of the conference table. A tiny red light blinked rhythmically, indicating it was actively capturing every single sound in the room. I looked up at my mother and smiled a cold, terrifying smile. I told her that I had suspected her financial fraud for over a decade. I always knew the math regarding my father and his estate never made any logical sense, but I never had the concrete proof to take to the federal authorities. Until this exact moment. Brenda stared down at the blinking red light. The blood completely drained from her face as the horrifying realization washed over her. She had just eagerly confessed to massive felony fraud and theft on a crystal-clear digital audio recording. She reached out with a trembling hand to frantically grab the small device, but I swiftly pulled it out of her reach and slipped it back into my blazer pocket. I picked up my cell phone from the table, preparing to quickly dial the local police. I was fully ready to have my own mother arrested for theft and forgery right then and there. She had permanently crossed the ultimate line, and I felt absolutely no guilt about sending her to a miserable federal prison cell to rot. But before my thumb could press the call button, the heavy boardroom door slowly pushed open. Charles Sterling walked into the room wearing a sharply tailored suit and a deeply sinister, confident smile. He looked directly at me, completely unbothered by the incredibly dramatic scene unfolding before his cold eyes. He slowly buttoned his expensive tailored jacket and stepped fully into my private corporate boardroom, carrying a thick manila envelope firmly tucked underneath his right arm. "Brenda, I think it is time for you to leave," Charles said without glancing at her. His tone was a harsh command from a man who believed he owned the world. My mother scrambled out of the boardroom, clutching her handbag, fleeing like a terrified child. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing me inside with the patriarch of the Sterling family. Charles pulled out the leather chair across from me and sat down, crossing his legs with infuriating casualness. He tossed the thick manila envelope onto the center of my table. He leaned back, resting his hands on his lap, letting out a condescending sigh. "You know, Maya," he began, his voice dripping with thinly veiled disgust. "This is exactly why old money families like mine are always hesitant to do business with people of your specific background. You get your hands on a little bit of new money and instantly lose all sense of class and decorum. You throw loud, aggressive tantrums and completely forget how the real world actually operates." I kept my face entirely neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing my anger. Charles pointed a finger at the manila envelope. He told me that inside was a legally binding contract drafted by his personal attorneys. It mandated that I immediately reinstate Marcus as the chief executive officer with a 20% salary increase and full access to all corporate banking accounts. It also included an ironclad non-disclosure agreement preventing me from speaking about the missing $400,000. He stated this was not a negotiation but an absolute demand. "My daughter Victoria is a sterling," Charles announced, his voice echoing loudly off the walls. "She was born into a century-old legacy of true wealth and absolute power. She deserves to live a life of pure luxury, and she was promised a rich husband who could provide that for her. I am not going to allow a bitter, jealous woman to ruin my daughter and her perfect life simply because you do not know your proper place in society." I slowly clasped my hands together, maintaining direct eye contact. I asked him what would happen if I refused to sign his ridiculous contract and threw his precious envelope right into the garbage. Charles let out a dark, menacing laugh. He leaned forward, placing both of his hands firmly on my table, trying to physically intimidate me. He threatened me directly, promising that if I did not sign those papers, he would use his massive, century-old family legacy to completely destroy my entire existence. He bragged that he played golf with the mayor, he dined with the local judges, and he held massive influence over the most powerful real estate investors. He swore that with one single phone call, he could have me permanently blacklisted from the entire business world. He claimed he would dry up all my corporate sponsorships, freeze my vendor supply chains, and make sure no respectable white business owner ever signed a contract with my hospitality group ever again. "You may have built a nice little company here, Maya," Charles sneered, his face turning red with racist anger. "But you do not know how the real world works when old money families decide to pull the strings. We can crush you before you even realize what hit you. So you are going to sign that contract and give Marcus his job back today. If you refuse, I will personally make sure you lose every single thing you have ever worked for, and you will end up right back in the ghetto where you belong." He sat back in his chair, crossing his arms, displaying a look of absolute victory. He genuinely believed his hateful racist microaggressions and empty threats had completely cornered me. He thought I was just a frightened little girl who would easily bow down to the powerful white patriarch. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of fear. I simply unlocked the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a bright red leather folder. I placed it gently on the table next to his pathetic manila envelope. I told Charles that I actually understood perfectly well how the real world operated. I explained that power was not about who your grandfather was or what country club you belonged to. Real power was about leverage and liquidity. I slid the red folder across the smooth mahogany wood until it rested directly in front of his shaking hands. I instructed him to open it and read the top page. Charles scoffed, rolling his eyes, but he impatiently flipped open the red cover. The smug, arrogant smile instantly vanished from his face. All the color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a ghost. His hands began to shake violently as his eyes darted across the certified banking documents. He tried to speak, but only a strangled, gasping sound escaped his throat. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I told him that I knew his so-called century-old empire was a complete sham. I knew his real estate development company had been secretly bleeding cash for the past 5 years. He had aggressively over-leveraged every single property, taking out massive commercial loans he could no longer pay back. "You see, Charles," I whispered, "you are completely bankrupt. Your old money legacy is drowning in toxic debt. Last Thursday, I quietly contacted your primary commercial lenders. I bought every single one of your defaulted loans in cash." Charles stared at me in sheer absolute horror. I smiled, informing him I was now his biggest creditor. I owned the debt on his estate and commercial buildings. "I am the bank now," I announced, tossing his envelope into the trash. "I am foreclosing on every single property by Friday." Charles could not breathe. He dropped the red leather folder and frantically fled the office in absolute terror. Charles Sterling practically tripped over his own expensive leather shoes as he scrambled out of my corporate office. He was breathing heavily, his face completely devoid of color, fleeing like a terrified coward who finally realized his century-old legacy was nothing but dust and unpaid commercial loans. I sat back in my leather chair, Taking a slow, deep breath, I felt a brief, satisfying moment of absolute victory. I had successfully cornered the arrogant patriarch and protected my hard-earned financial assets from his greedy, manipulative grasp. But my quiet moment of triumph lasted for exactly 2 hours before my cell phone began to vibrate violently across my desk. It was not just one call. It was dozens of notifications flooding my screen simultaneously. Elias, my lead attorney, burst through my office doors without knocking. His usually calm face was tight with genuine panic. He held out his tablet displaying a social media application. He told me Victoria had just launched a massive nuclear strike against my entire public reputation. I stared at the glowing screen, cornered and desperate after realizing her husband was completely broke and her father was facing total bankruptcy. Victoria decided to play her ultimate trump card. She posted a highly manipulative, heavily edited video online. In the video, she was sitting on the floor of a dimly lit room, wearing an oversized sweater and crying hysterically into the camera. She weaponized her white tears with absolute chilling perfection. Victoria wept loudly, claiming that her beautiful, innocent dream wedding was maliciously destroyed by an aggressive, jealous, and unhinged black sister-in-law. She omitted the fact that I personally funded the entire $250,000 event. She conveniently forgot to mention that her husband had embezzled $400,000 from my employees to buy her diamond ring. Instead, she painted herself as the pure, helpless victim of a senseless, cruel attack. She looked directly into the camera lens, with mascara running down her pale cheeks, and claimed, "I had terrorized her family out of pure spite. She used every single racially charged dog whistle imaginable. She called me a ghetto tyrant who used dirty money to oppress polite society." She sobbed about how she was terrified for her safety, claiming I had a history of being an angry, bitter woman who hated seeing a successful, loving family come together. The video was a masterclass in toxic manipulation, designed to trigger the exact societal biases she knew would protect her. And it worked flawlessly. By the time Elias showed me the video, it had already amassed over 5 million views. It was spreading across every major platform like absolute wildfire. The internet immediately and blindly sided with the crying white bride. The comment section was an absolute cesspool of hateful, racist rhetoric directed entirely at me. People who had absolutely no idea who I was, or what my business actually did, were forming a massive digital mob. Cancel culture had officially locked onto my hospitality group. Influencers were stitching her video, demanding immediate boycotts of all my luxury resorts and restaurants. Online activists were calling my corporate offices, leaving hundreds of threatening voicemails and flooding my review pages with fake one-star ratings. The media quickly picked up the viral story, running with the sensationalized narrative of the wealthy, angry black woman who selfishly ruined a beautiful young bride and her special day. My internal phone line started lighting up like a Christmas tree. The public relations department was in a state of absolute chaos. Elias paced across my office, reading incoming emails aloud. Our major corporate partners were panicking. These were large conservative companies that rented my resort spaces for their annual conferences, and they were terrified of being associated with a viral public relations nightmare. My primary beverage supplier called to temporarily suspend our distribution. Contract, a massive technology firm that had booked $1 million corporate retreat at my flagship property for next month, abruptly canceled their reservation, citing a sudden change in their event guidelines. The Empire I had spent my entire adult life building from scratch was taking massive, catastrophic hits from every single direction. To make matters infinitely worse, the television mounted on my office wall suddenly switched to a breaking local news broadcast. I grabbed the remote and turned up the volume, completely unable to believe what I was seeing. My mother, Brenda, was sitting live in a television studio right next to Marcus. They were participating in an exclusive interview to discuss the viral wedding disaster. Brenda looked directly into the news camera, wiping fake tears from her eyes with a tissue. She publicly validated every single one of Victoria and her malicious lies. My own biological mother sat on local television and played the role of the heartbroken victim. She told the eager news anchor that I had always been a deeply troubled, aggressive child who hated my own family. She claimed I was obsessed with destroying my brother and his happiness out of pure toxic jealousy. Marcus sat beside her, looking incredibly sad and defeated, nodding along as Brenda spun her web of absolute deception. They completely sold me out to the media to save their own pathetic reputations. By publicly confirming the false narrative, Brenda gave the angry internet mob all the validation they needed to escalate their relentless attacks. Elias set his sleek silver tablet down on my desk. His voice was heavy with dark dread as he carefully informed me that our three biggest investors had just requested a mandatory emergency board meeting. The major corporate sponsors were officially pulling their multi-million-dollar contracts. The international banks were calling to review our active credit lines. My entire business empire was suddenly standing on the terrifying brink of total and complete financial collapse, all because a desperate woman knew exactly how to cry on camera, and my mother was willing to sacrifice me to the vicious and hungry wolves. The emergency board meeting was called less than 30 minutes after the local news broadcast concluded. I walked into the main conference room of my corporate headquarters to find my 12 largest investors already seated around the massive glass table. They did not look like the confident billionaires who had happily shaken my hand at our last quarterly review. They looked like terrified passengers on a sinking ship. The television was muted, but it was still replaying the video of Victoria crying on the floor, followed directly by the terrible interview of my mother completely selling me out to strangers. The lead investor, an older wealthy man named Richard, did not even wait for me to take my seat at the head of the table. He stood up and slammed his hands down on the glass. He stated that my hospitality group was hemorrhaging money by the second. He told the room that 2 international hotel brands were threatening to sever our joint ventures. He said the public relations crisis was completely unsustainable, and the board had reached a unanimous decision. They formally demanded that I step down as chief executive officer immediately before the stock market opened next morning. I pulled out my chair and sat down slowly. I looked at the 12 men and women who had profited immensely from my relentless work ethic over the past decade. I asked them if they really believed the ridiculous narrative playing on the television. Another board member named Susan cleared her throat. She looked at me with an expression of thinly veiled condescension. She explained that it did not matter what they personally believed. She said the market responds only to optics. And right now, my optics were absolutely catastrophic and were actively destroying the entire brand we had built. Susan leaned forward, lowering her voice to employ the exact racial dog whistles my mother and sister-in-law used on national television. She told me corporate leadership requires emotional stability and calm composure that I was failing to demonstrate. She said while I had done an acceptable job building the company, I was simply too aggressive and combative to handle high society public relations. She had the absolute audacity to tell me I needed to step aside and let a level-headed interim executive slowly repair the critical business relationships I had supposedly destroyed with my reckless emotional outbursts. They were looking at a black woman who made them millions, and the moment a white woman cried on the internet, they instantly reverted to racist tropes. They saw me as the angry black woman who could not control her temper. They wanted to strip me of my empire to appease an internet mob. I felt pure rage rising in my chest, but I forced my heart rate to remain steady. I knew if I raised my voice even a fraction of a decibel, I would only be confirming the stereotype they were currently weaponizing against me in this room. I placed my hands flat on the glass table and looked directly at Richard. I told him that I was the founder, the majority shareholder, and the sole visionary of this entire enterprise. I reminded them that I held 51% of the voting power, which meant they could not legally force me out without a prolonged legal battle that would truly destroy the company's stock. I told them I absolutely refused to step down from my position, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I was not going to let them steal my life work based on malicious lies. The boardroom erupted in angry protests. Several investors threatened to dump their shares by morning. I raised my hand for silence. I told them I only needed exactly 48 hours. I promised if they gave me 2 days to handle this situation, I would not only clear my name completely, but bring them a revelation that would absolutely double our current stock value. I swore I was about to acquire the largest real estate portfolio in the state for pennies on the dollar, but I needed them to hold the line and trust the woman who made them rich. Richard looked around the room weighing his options. He knew a hostile takeover would be a bloodbath that would cost them everything. He finally nodded, stating I had exactly 48 hours before they initiated emergency procedures to freeze my corporate authority. He warned me that I better deliver a miracle or my career was permanently finished. The moment they vacated the boardroom, I locked the heavy doors and picked up my encrypted cell phone. Playing by the rules was no longer an option. Victoria and Charles Sterling wanted to use the media to destroy me, so I chose retaliation. I dialed a classified number I kept saved for absolute emergencies. The man who answered was a top-tier underground private investigator and former intelligence officer named Silas. He specialized in elite corporate espionage and digital forensics. He did not ask any unnecessary questions. He simply named his exorbitant price, which I agreed to pay in untraceable cryptocurrency without a single second of hesitation. I gave Silas one very clear objective. I ordered him to completely bypass all legal boundaries and ruthlessly hack into every private server email account and encrypted cloud storage drive belonging to the Sterling family estate. I needed every text message, every hidden bank statement, and every deleted file Charles and Victoria had created. I knew wealthy, arrogant people always left a trail of digital arrogance because they genuinely believed they were untouchable. Silas promised he would have a data dump delivered to a highly secure server by tomorrow morning. I hung up the phone and looked out the massive boardroom window at the sprawling city below. My mother and my brother thought they had finally defeated me. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. They would never see the light of high society again. The sun slowly rose over the waking city, illuminating the dark sky. But I had not slept a single minute during the long, agonizing night. I sat completely alone inside my massive executive office, staring blankly at my encrypted computer monitor. Right on schedule. A highly secure notification suddenly popped up on my glowing screen. Silas delivered exactly what I paid for. A massive digital archive containing the darkest and most twisted secrets of the Sterling family arrived in my secure inbox. Silas had completely bypassed their supposedly impenetrable firewalls, leaving absolutely no trace of his presence. I immediately downloaded the heavily encrypted files and opened the first primary folder labeled Victoria. I genuinely expected to find standard financial manipulation or hidden offshore bank accounts. But what I discovered made my blood run absolutely cold. It was a secret, highly illegal prenuptial agreement drafted privately between Victoria and her father Charles, alongside a long trail of hidden emails sent directly to their private family lawyers. Reading through their arrogant correspondence, the entire twisted truth beautifully unfolded. Charles and Victoria knew all along that Marcus was a complete, absolute fraud. They knew perfectly well that he did not actually own Marcus Innovations, and that he was merely a pathetic parasite living entirely off my corporate funds. Their master plan was incredibly sinister and deeply calculated. Victoria deliberately married Marcus with a specific timeline in mind. The secret emails outlined their vicious strategy step by step. Victoria was going to stay married to my older brother for exactly 6 months. During that specific time, she planned to subtly gather sensitive corporate information and highly classified financial records. Then she was going to intentionally frame Marcus for severe domestic abuse. The emails explicitly and gleefully discussed using nasty racial stereotypes to their distinct advantage. Charles wrote that the media and the justice system would blindly and instantly believe a crying, wealthy white woman accusing a loud, aggressive black man of physical violence. Once Marcus was inevitably arrested and thrown behind bars, Victoria would file for an immediate messy divorce, demanding half of his marital assets as a massive lucrative settlement. Because my mother Brenda had previously and illegally given Marcus unrestricted access to my company accounts. Victoria and Charles firmly believed they could legally seize a massive portion of my hospitality empire. They were going to use my hard-earned money to bail out the bankrupt Sterling real estate legacy and permanently save their failing old money status. They specifically targeted my brother because he was a foolish, desperate pawn who desperately craved white validation, and they expertly used his blinding greed to try and steal my entire life work. I sat back in my leather chair completely disgusted by the pure, unadulterated evil radiating from my computer screen. My own brother was an arrogant, petty thief, but Victoria and Charles were calculating ruthless predators. I quickly downloaded all the damning emails, the secret prenup and the digital footprints directly onto a secure encrypted flash drive. I slipped the small metal drive safely into my blazer pocket I finally possessed. The exact nuclear evidence required to not only save my company, but to send Charles and Victoria straight to a miserable federal prison cell. I was just about to call Elias to prepare our immediate legal strike against the Sterling family when my private cell phone suddenly rang. It was not my lawyer. It was David, the senior branch manager at the private bank that held all my personal and corporate accounts. David sounded incredibly frantic and completely out of breath. He profusely apologized for calling my personal line so early in the morning, but he stated he had an absolute catastrophic emergency developing right now in his main lobby. David told me that my mother Brenda had just marched into the bank looking completely disheveled and acting incredibly erratic. She was sitting inside his private office right at that very moment, aggressively demanding a massive emergency loan. She was desperately trying to borrow $500,000 against the deed to my childhood home. The beautiful house was completely paid off and legally belonged entirely to me, but Brenda was actively trying to use outdated revoked power of attorney documents to bypass the strict security checks and steal my equity. David carefully explained that Brenda was weeping hysterically, claiming it was a matter of extreme life and death. I asked David exactly why my mother needed $500,000 in cash before normal banking hours officially began. He lowered his voice to a frightened whisper, checking to ensure his office door was closed. He told me. Brenda tearfully confessed that Marcus was in severe immediate physical danger in his desperate attempt to fund his fake billionaire lifestyle and pay for the lavish, extravagant wedding expenses I had suddenly canceled. Marcus had not just embezzled my corporate funds. He had also gone to highly aggressive, violent underground loan sharks in the city to cover his tracks and buy expensive designer gifts for Victoria. Now that the wedding was ruined, his accounts were frozen, and his fake status was publicly exposed. The dangerous loan sharks were calling in his massive debts with immediate violent physical threats. Marcus had apparently gone crying to his mommy, begging her to save his pathetic life. And Brenda was perfectly willing to steal my house to pay off his criminal debts without any hesitation. I instructed David to remain perfectly calm and keep Brenda sitting comfortably inside his private office. I told him to casually print out the thick loan paperwork and let her foolishly believe she was actually getting away with massive financial fraud. I grabbed my designer winter coat and marched straight out of the executive suite, heading directly for the private elevator. Brenda truly thought she could simply forge my signature and steal my personal property to save her precious golden boy. Once again, I was going to make sure she wore shiny silver handcuffs. I drove my car through morning traffic, focused on reaching the private bank before my mother could do permanent damage. David, the branch manager, kept Brenda stalled inside his glass office just as I instructed. I parked near the main entrance and spotted the two uniformed police officers waiting for me. I called the local precinct en route, explaining that active financial fraud and identity theft was taking place utilizing revoked power of attorney documents. The officers recognized me immediately and followed closely behind me as I pushed through the revolving doors of the lobby. The marble floors echoed with our footsteps as we marched toward the private offices. Through the glass walls, I saw Brenda sitting across from David. She leaned over his desk, clutching a tissue, wiping away dramatic fake tears. David looked uncomfortable, shifting in his leather chair as he pushed a thick stack of loan applications toward her. I signaled for the officers to wait just outside the door, allowing me to hear what twisted narrative my mother was spinning to justify stealing $500,000 from her own daughter. Brenda sobbed, her voice penetrating the glass walls. She told David that I was a cold, heartless monster who lost my mind over a minor family misunderstanding. She wept bitterly, claiming Marcus was an innocent, loving brother who simply made a tiny financial mistake to provide a beautiful wedding for his bride. She swore to the bank manager that ruthless loan sharks were hunting Marcus down and threatening his life. Brenda cried that I had selfishly abandoned my flesh and blood to be murdered in the streets out of pure bitter jealousy. She told David that as a desperate mother, she had no choice but to use her legal authority to access my equity because I was too cruel to save my own brother from imminent death. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up a silver pen from David's desk. She sniffled and positioned the pen over the signature line of the massive $500,000 loan agreement. She was prepared to forge my name and drain the equity of my childhood home to bail out her pathetic, criminal son. I did not wait another second. I grabbed the brass handle and pushed the office door open. Brenda froze, the silver pen hovering inches above the legal document. Her head snapped up, and her tear-stained face drained of color when she saw me standing in the doorway. My expression was absolute stone. David stood up from his desk, letting out a sigh of profound relief. Brenda dropped the pen and scrambled to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing her instantly. I walked over to the desk and picked up the loan application. She had already forged my signature on the first 2 pages, sealing her own fate. I turned to look at my mother, who was trembling with genuine terror. I told her that her performance was moving, but unfortunately for her power of attorney, documents do not cover identity theft and bank fraud. I gestured toward the open doorway. The 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the office, their faces stern and uncompromising. The taller officer unclipped the shiny silver handcuffs from his belt and instructed Brenda to place her hands behind her back. Brenda lost her mind. She backed away into the corner of the office, shrieking at the top of her lungs. She screamed that I was an evil, ungrateful child, trying to lock my mother in a cage. She threw a violent tantrum, knocking a stack of files off the desk as the officers grabbed her arms to apply the steel cuffs. She thrashed and wailed, playing the desperate victim, screaming that she only did this because she loved her family. She yelled that I was destroying her life over a piece of paper. She shrieked for Marcus, screaming his name over and over, begging her golden boy to come inside and save her from this nightmare. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of the bank office, which provided a perfectly clear view of the front parking lot. I pointed through the glass, directing my mother's frantic gaze outside. Parked near the edge of the lot was a gray rental car, sitting with the engine running. Marcus was sitting in the driver's seat, waiting for his mother to emerge with my stolen cash. When Brenda screamed his name, the sound seemingly carried through the glass. Marcus looked up and saw the 2 police officers pressing his mother against the wall, securing the metal handcuffs around her wrists. Brenda wailed his name, pressing her face against the window, expecting her precious son to rush into the bank and heroically defend her. But Marcus did not open his car door. He did not run to her rescue. He stared at his mother in handcuffs for 2 seconds. Then he shifted the car into drive and slammed his foot down on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the pavement, burning rubber as he sped out of the parking lot like a coward. He merged recklessly into busy traffic, abandoning the woman who had just sacrificed her freedom to save his pathetic life. Brenda collapsed against the glass window, her knees giving out completely. The police officers had to hold her up to keep her from hitting the floor. She let out a devastating sob of pure heartbreak, watching the taillights of her favorite child disappear down the street. She finally realized the horrifying truth that I had known for years. Her golden boy cared about no one but himself. I stood silently beside her, watching the realization crush her spirit. She forged documents, stolen my inheritance, and tried to rob my home to protect a man who would not step out of his car to save her from a prison cell. The tires of the gray rental car squealed loudly as Marcus recklessly swerved onto the main highway. He kept checking his rearview mirror, paranoid that the police or the ruthless loan sharks were actively tailing him. He pushed his foot down hard on the accelerator, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. He had just watched his own mother get handcuffed against a bank window, and his only instinct had been cowardice. He drove straight to a seedy, rundown motel on the dark outskirts of the city. It was the only miserable place he and Victoria could afford to hide from media reporters and the dangerous debt collectors who were actively hunting him down. The neon sign outside the motel buzzed loudly, half of its letters burnt out. Marcus parked in the back, steadied his shaking hands, and sprinted toward room 12. He shoved the cheap wooden door open, gasping for air. Victoria was sitting on the edge of a stained, lumpy mattress. She wore expensive silk pajamas that looked completely ridiculous in the filthy motel room. The walls were peeling, and the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke permeated the air. Victoria looked up, her blue eyes flashing with intense irritation. She demanded to know if he had secured the $500,000 from Brenda. Marcus collapsed against the door, sweating profusely. He frantically shook his head, his voice cracking as he explained the absolute disaster that just unfolded at the bank. He told her that Maya had intercepted the transaction. He confessed Brenda was currently sitting in a police cruiser facing federal forgery charges, and they had absolutely no cash left. Marcus fell to his knees on the dirty carpet right in front of Victoria. He desperately grabbed her pale hands, begging her to call her father immediately. He pleaded with Victoria to use the legendary Sterling family wealth to hire a criminal defense lawyer for his mother. More importantly, he begged her to wire him enough cash to pay off the aggressive loan sharks who were promising to break his legs before sunset. He swore once the dust settled, he would sue Maya and get their luxury lifestyle back. He clung to Victoria, crying pathetic tears, relying on the sweet, innocent bride persona she had projected since they met. He expected his wealthy white wife to tap into her century-old trust funds to save her distressed husband from total ruin and protect their marriage. Victoria did not comfort him. She did not reach for her phone to call her powerful father. Instead, she slowly pulled her hands away from his desperate grip. Her face grew terrifyingly cold and utterly blank. She looked down at Marcus as if he were a disgusting insect on her expensive shoes. She asked him one very specific, very sharp question. She demanded to know if there was a single penny left in any account anywhere he could legally access. Marcus swallowed hard, avoiding her piercing gaze. He quietly admitted that Maya had completely frozen everything, and that she now personally owned all the Sterling family commercial debt. The crushing reality finally clicked inside Victoria's mind. Her elaborate master plan was dead. There was absolutely no money left to extract from Maya. Marcus was not a temporary victim, he was a broke fraud. Victoria dropped her sweet, innocent facade instantly. The delicate crying victim from the viral video vanished, replaced by a ruthless predator. She stood up from the stained bed, towering over a kneeling Marcus. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sent a chill down his spine. She asked if he honestly believed a woman of her high society pedigree would ever genuinely love a fake executive like him. Victoria kicked his hands away and began hurling deeply offensive racial slurs directly at his face. She called him a worthless ghetto con artist who was too stupid to even successfully steal from his own sister. She screamed she only married a black man because she thought he was an easy ticket to a massive corporate settlement. She shredded every ounce of his false masculine pride, confirming her malicious intentions. Marcus sat frozen on the floor, paralyzed by her hateful, racist venom. Victoria did not waste another second. She marched over to the small, rickety closet and grabbed the cheap garbage bags containing Marcus and his fake designer clothes. She unzipped the bags and violently hurled his counterfeit luxury suits, cheap cologne, and fake watches straight out the open motel door. His pathetic belongings scattered across the muddy, oil-stained parking lot, soaking up dirty puddles. Victoria grabbed Marcus by the collar of his shirt and shoved him forcefully out the door right into the cold morning air, treating him exactly like the trash she believed he was. Marcus stumbled and fell hard onto the wet concrete, scraping his knees against the rough gravel. He turned around just as Victoria slammed the cheap motel door shut and slid the heavy metal deadbolt into place. He pounded his fists against the thin wood, begging her to let him back inside, crying that the loan sharks were going to kill him. Through the thin motel window, Marcus could hear Victoria speaking clearly on her cell phone. She was not calling her father for help. She had called her private attorney. He listened in sheer, absolute horror as his new bride coldly instructed her lawyer to immediately file the paperwork for a marriage annulment. She loudly demanded that the legal team draft a massive civil lawsuit against Marcus for severe financial fraud and emotional distress. He had no money, no wife, no mother, and nowhere left to run. The heavy rain began to fall again, washing away the last remnants of his fake, glamorous life. He was entirely, utterly, and completely destroyed. He sat completely alone on the cold, damp pavement, wrapping his arms around his shivering body, finally realizing the true cost of betraying the only sister who had ever actually cared about his miserable, pathetic existence. The crisp autumn air surrounded the grand entrance of the City Museum of Fine Arts, which was playing host to the most exclusive and highly anticipated charity gala of the entire year. Despite being completely bankrupt and secretly facing massive foreclosures across their entire real estate portfolio, Charles Sterling and his daughter Victoria somehow managed to secure highly coveted invitations to the prestigious event. They were absolutely desperate. They knew my legal team was finalizing the property seizures, and their only remaining hope was to manipulate a brand new wealthy investor into bailing out their sinking old money empire. Victoria had spent the last of her available credit on a stunning silver evening gown, attempting to project the flawless image of pristine high society wealth. She stood near the velvet ropes at the grand entrance, expertly playing the role of the innocent and deeply wronged bride. She batted her mascara-coated eyelashes at older billionaire donors, softly spinning her fabricated tale of how a cruel, aggressive black family had completely terrorized her during her wedding weekend. Charles stood right beside her, clutching a crystal glass of bourbon, actively scanning the arriving crowd for any prominent venture capitalists who might be foolish enough to hand him a multi-million-dollar lifeline before my foreclosure deadlines hit on Friday. They were hunting for a financial savior, and they genuinely believed their white aristocratic charm would easily secure them a massive blank check. I stepped out of my sleek black town car, wearing a custom-tailored emerald green gown that swept elegantly across the red carpet. I arrived at the gala alone, feeling completely empowered and deeply focused on the evening ahead. As I walked gracefully up the wide marble steps leading toward the towering brass doors, Victoria spotted me from across the entryway. Her fake sweet smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated venom. She completely abandoned the wealthy older couple she was manipulating and aggressively marched straight toward me, blocking my path to the main entrance. Charles quickly followed closely behind her, his face turning a dark shade of furious red as he realized the very woman who held all his crippling debt was daring to show her face in his supposed elite social territory. Victoria planted herself firmly on the red carpet, crossing her arms tightly across her silver dress. She looked me up and down with absolute profound disgust. She loudly scoffed, making sure her shrill voice carried clearly over the gentle murmurs of the arriving high society guests. She demanded to know how someone like me managed to sneak past the front gate. She yelled that this was a highly respectable gathering for the city elite and not a cheap public park where ghetto trash could just wander in off the streets. Her racist microaggressions were blatant and entirely intentional. She loudly declared that I was a dangerous corporate criminal who had maliciously destroyed her beautiful marriage out of pure bitter jealousy. She told the surrounding crowd of wealthy donors that I had absolutely no class, no breeding, and no right to breathe the same refined air as her prominent family. Charles stepped up right next to his daughter, puffing out his chest to physically intimidate me. He confidently snapped his fingers in the air, gesturing aggressively toward the three large men working the security detail at the velvet ropes. He loudly commanded the guards to immediately grab my arms and forcefully drag me off the property. He shouted that I was an unhinged stalker who had been aggressively harassing his innocent daughter ever since the wedding disaster. He demanded that they call the police and have me permanently banned from the premises because my aggressive presence was an absolute insult to the wealthy philanthropists attending the gala. Victoria smirked with supreme, arrogant satisfaction, fully expecting the large security guards to instantly obey the authoritative demands of an old-money white patriarch. She genuinely believed her family name still carried the ultimate power to erase me from any room she desired. She leaned forward and whispered viciously that I should run back to my miserable, lonely life before she had me locked in a dirty holding cell where people of my kind truly belonged. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. I simply stood there on the red carpet, looking at the two desperate, pathetic frauds who were actively drowning in my financial web. The three large security guards, wearing crisp black suits and discreet earpieces, briskly walked over to where we were standing. Victoria eagerly stepped aside, gesturing for them to grab my arms and humiliate me in front of the entire city elite. Instead of grabbing my arms, the lead security guard stopped directly in front of Victoria. He looked at her pointing finger and then let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. He shook his head, finding her arrogant demands utterly hilarious. The other two guards smiled, turning their backs on Charles, completely ignoring his furious commands. The lead guard immediately stepped aside, holding the heavy brass door wide open for me. He stood up perfectly straight, placing his hands behind his back, and offered me a deep, respectful bow. He loudly and clearly greeted me, welcoming me to the event and asking if I required any assistance with the evening schedule. Victoria was left entirely speechless. Her jaw dropped open in absolute pure shock as she stared at the guards who were treating me like absolute royalty. She shrieked, demanding to know why they were ignoring her father and bowing to a common street criminal. I calmly stepped past her, leaning in just close enough so she could hear every single deliberate word. I explained that the security guards were not going to throw me out because they worked directly for me. I told her that I was not just a random guest trying to sneak into a party. I revealed that my corporate hospitality group was the primary financial sponsor of this exclusive charity gala, and I was the main host of the evening. I personally signed the paychecks for every single security guard standing at that door. She finally realized her very massive mistake. The interior of the museum ballroom was a dazzling display of excessive wealth and desperate networking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the tables draped in expensive white silk. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated silently, carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar and vintage champagne. I stood near the grand staircase, observing the room with total clarity. Across the massive ballroom, I spotted Charles and Victoria Sterling. They were hovering desperately around table 4. That specific table belonged to a highly prominent venture capitalist named Harrison. I knew Harrison well. He was a notorious billionaire investor, known for writing massive checks to save failing real estate portfolios. Charles was leaning in close to Harrison, sweating through his tailored suit, aggressively pitching a $10 million lifeline to save his sinking empire. Victoria was sitting right next to the billionaire, flashing her most dazzling, innocent smile. She gently touched Harrison on the arm, laughing too loudly at his jokes, expertly playing the role of the charming, sophisticated society daughter. They were literally begging for their financial survival. I smoothed down the fabric of my emerald green gown and walked slowly across the crowded ballroom floor. I did not rush. I wanted them to see me coming. As I approached table 4, Victoria spotted me first. Her fake bright smile completely collapsed. Her manicured hand dropped from Harrison's arm as her face turned a sickly shade of pale gray. Charles followed her gaze and his entire body went rigid. I stopped directly across from their table, looking down at them with absolute calm authority. Charles immediately stood up, puffing out his chest to block my view of the billionaire investor. He slammed his crystal glass down on the table, causing the expensive liquor to spill over the edge. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He loudly cleared his throat, making sure Harrison was paying close attention to his next words. He wanted to completely humiliate me and destroy any credibility I had left in the business world before I could ruin his desperate pitch. "I do not know how you managed to bribe the security guards to let you inside," Charles sneered, his voice dripping with venom and racist condescension. He turned to Harrison, shaking his head with a look of manufactured pity. "Harrison, please excuse this highly unfortunate interruption. This woman is a complete public relations nightmare. She is a fraud who aggressively targeted my family out of pure spite and bitter jealousy. She lacks the basic refined etiquette required for a respectable gathering like this." Charles turned back to me, pointing a shaking finger toward the exit doors. He demanded that I turn around and walk away from his table instantly. He told the billionaire that old money families like his were constantly being harassed by newly rich, desperate individuals trying to steal their prestigious legacy. He loudly called for a waiter, demanding they summon the head of security to have me forcefully escorted off the museum property. Victoria chimed in, wiping a fake tear from her eye, claiming my very presence was deeply traumatizing her after the wedding disaster. I did not argue with Charles. I did not defend myself to the billionaire investor who was watching the scene with quiet, intense curiosity. I simply looked at Charles and offered him a chilling, perfectly composed smile. I told him to enjoy his champagne because it was going to be the absolute last drop of luxury he would ever taste. I turned my back on the panicked Sterling family and walked purposefully toward the grand main stage at the front of the magnificent ballroom. The event coordinator saw me approaching and immediately signaled the audio-visual team. The soft background music faded into total silence. The bright house lights dimmed, leaving only a single powerful spotlight illuminating the center of the stage. I stepped up to the polished glass podium and tapped the microphone. A sharp, clear hum echoed through the massive room, instantly capturing the attention of every single wealthy donor, investor, and socialite present. 500 faces turned toward me in absolute perfect silence. "Good evening, distinguished guests," I announced, my voice resonating with absolute, unquestionable power. As the primary financial sponsor and host of tonight's gala, I want to thank you all for attending. We are here to support transparency and truth. I pressed a small button on the podium console. The massive projector screen behind me flared to life. Instead of a standard charity promotional video, the screen displayed the highly classified secret emails between Charles and Victoria. The font was magnified so everyone in the room could read the horrific details of their master plan to falsely accuse a black man of abuse and steal my corporate assets. Gasps echoed through the wealthy crowd as they read the undeniable proof of the Sterling family committing wire fraud. Then I cued the audio track. Victoria's loud, shrill voice blasted through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. The entire ballroom listened in sheer, horrified silence as the audio recording played her hurling vile, aggressive racial slurs at Marcus. The recording captured her gleefully admitting that her pristine, innocent marriage was nothing but a calculated scam to steal black wealth and save her bankrupt father. Victoria covered her face with her hands, letting out a piercing scream of pure, absolute terror. Charles grabbed the edge of the table, his knees buckling as the crushing weight of public humiliation destroyed his fake aristocratic legacy. The billionaire investor named Harrison stood up from his chair, looking at Charles with intense disgust before turning his back and walking away. I stood alone on the illuminated stage, looking down at the two miserable predators who had foolishly tried to ruin my beautiful life. The high society crowd began whispering furiously, pointing their fingers directly at the ruined Sterling family, who now had nowhere left to hide. The truth was finally exposed for everyone to see. The truth was finally exposed for everyone to see. The deafening silence that had gripped the massive museum ballroom suddenly shattered into a chaotic roar of disgusted gasps and furious whispers. The wealthy elite of the city, the very people Charles and Victoria had desperately relied upon to save their sinking legacy, instantly turned their backs on the Sterling family. Women in expensive designer gowns physically stepped away from Victoria as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Prominent bank executives and wealthy venture capitalists, whom Charles had spent decades carefully courting, openly shook their heads in absolute revulsion. The recording of Victoria, using vile racial slurs and openly admitting to marital fraud, had completely destroyed their carefully curated aristocratic image in a matter of seconds. There was no recovering from this level of profound public humiliation. The prominent socialites who had eagerly embraced Victoria mere moments ago now stared at her with expressions of absolute contempt. They realized they had been completely manipulated by a desperate broke family trying to exploit their charitable generosity. Their collective rejection was palpable and utterly devastating. Charles Sterling completely snapped. The polished, composed demeanor of an old money patriarch instantly evaporated, revealing the desperate cornered animal hiding underneath his expensive tailored tuxedo. His face turned a dangerous mottled shade of purple. He let out a primal roar of absolute fury that echoed loudly over the murmurs of the high society crowd. He shoved his way past the surrounding tables, violently knocking over a silver tray of champagne glasses that crashed loudly onto the marble floor. He charged directly toward the main stage where I was standing. He lost his mind, screaming at the top of his lungs that I was a lying, manipulative fraud who had somehow fabricated the audio recording to ruin his innocent daughter. He wanted to physically hurt me. He sprinted up the carpeted stairs of the stage with his hands balled into tight fists, aiming straight for the glass podium, where I stood perfectly still. He yelled that he was going to tear the entire projection system apart, and then he was going to make sure I paid for destroying his family with my life. He genuinely believed that his wealth and white privilege gave him the ultimate right to commit physical violence against a black woman in a room full of witnesses without facing a single consequence. He severely underestimated the professional security team I had personally hired for the evening. Before Charles could even come within 10 feet of my podium, 3 massive security guards intercepted him with flawless, brutal efficiency. The lead guard grabbed Charles by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo and swiftly twisted his arm behind his back. Charles thrashed and kicked, screaming offensive insults and demanding that the guards unhand him instantly. He yelled that he was a powerful man and that they were making a catastrophic mistake. The guards did not care about his empty threats. They effortlessly swept his legs out from under him and firmly pinned the arrogant patriarch face down against the hard wooden floor of the stage. Victoria stood frozen at her table, watching her powerful father get tackled to the ground like a common street criminal. She tried to scream for help, but not a single person in the ballroom moved to assist them. The wealthy donors and powerful investors simply watched the spectacular downfall of the Sterling Empire with cold, unforgiving eyes. Charles groaned in pain as the security guard pressed a knee firmly between his shoulder blades, completely neutralizing his violent outburst. I looked down at the pathetic man pinned to the floor, my expression completely devoid of any sympathy. I stepped out from behind the glass podium and walked slowly toward the edge of the stage. At that exact moment, the billionaire investor named Harrison, the very man Charles and Victoria had been desperately begging for a $10 million financial lifeline just minutes earlier, stepped out from the shocked crowd. Harrison calmly adjusted his tailored suit and walked purposefully up the stairs to the main stage. He did not look at Charles, who was still struggling and cursing on the floor. Harrison walked directly over to me and offered a warm, highly respectful smile. He gently took the microphone from my hand. The entire ballroom instantly fell completely, silent once again, eager to hear what the notoriously ruthless billionaire venture capitalist had to say about this unprecedented public spectacle. Harrison tapped the microphone and looked out at the sea of wealthy elites. He announced that he needed to clarify a very important business matter regarding the Sterling family and their sudden, desperate pleas for emergency investment funding. He stated that Charles Sterling had spent the entire evening pitching him a massive real estate deal, claiming the Sterling legacy was highly profitable and perfectly secure. Harrison then turned his sharp gaze down to Charles, who was staring up at the billionaire with wide, terrified eyes. Harrison boldly revealed to the entire room that he would never invest a single penny into the Sterling family business for one very specific reason. He loudly proclaimed that he was actually the primary silent partner and lead equity backer of the Maya Washington Hospitality Group. He told the crowd that he had been working exclusively with me for the past 5 years to systematically build our massive corporate empire. He completely validated my immense wealth and absolute business brilliance in front of the exact high society crowd that had tried to cancel me just 24 hours ago. Harrison then reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick stack of folded legal documents. He knelt down next to the security guards holding Charles on the floor. Harrison firmly slapped the heavy legal papers directly against Charles' chest. He formally and publicly served the patriarch with official foreclosure documents seizing every commercial property the Sterling family owned. The humiliation was finally complete. The total public humiliation of the Sterling family at my charity gala was finally complete, but their absolute desperation was far from over. 3 weeks after the catastrophic museum event, Victoria officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against my brother Marcus. The high-profile court case became an absolute media circus overnight. Victoria sued him for severe emotional distress and massive financial fraud. She expertly painted herself as the completely innocent, naive white victim who fell into the dangerous trap of a manipulative black con artist. She hired a highly aggressive, high-priced attorney named Montgomery to spin her toxic racist narrative directly into a courtroom spectacle. Montgomery knew perfectly well that Marcus was completely broke and had absolutely no money to pay a settlement. Their actual target was never my pathetic brother. Their true target was my massive corporate bank account. Victoria and her legal team formally subpoenaed me to appear in court as a hostile witness. Their sinister master plan was incredibly transparent. Montgomery intended to aggressively corner me on the witness stand and falsely accuse me of orchestrating the entire wedding disaster out of pure malicious jealousy. They wanted to humiliate me in front of the local press and threaten my company with an endless, messy public relations nightmare. They genuinely believed I would eagerly agree to pay a multi-million-dollar settlement completely out of court, just to protect my family name and make the media scandal disappear forever. They thought I would quietly write them a massive check to save my business empire from further racial smear campaigns. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I do not pay extortion money to racists, and I certainly do not hide from a public fight. The grand courtroom was packed tightly with eager journalists and whispering spectators. When I arrived, Victoria sat at the plaintiff table wearing a modest pale blue dress with minimal makeup designed to make her look incredibly young and fragile. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands, actively weeping for the sympathetic jury and the presiding judge. The judge was an older white man who was already showing blatant, undeniable bias toward the crying bride. He offered Victoria gentle, reassuring nods while shooting harsh, suspicious glares across the room at my brother Marcus. Marcus sat completely alone at the defense table, looking absolutely terrified and completely broken. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit because all his fake luxury clothes were currently rotting in a motel parking lot. He had no expensive lawyer to defend him because he had absolutely no money to hire one. Montgomery stood up and began his aggressive opening arguments. He paced back and forth in front of the jury box, dramatically pointing his finger at Marcus. He spun a horrifying, fictitious tale about how Marcus used deceit and malicious financial fraud to trick a sweet, trusting woman into a fake marriage. Montgomery then turned his sharp gaze directly toward the gallery where I was sitting quietly in the second row. He loudly declared to the judge that this entire fraudulent scheme was bankrolled and supported by a deeply bitter sister who hated seeing a beautiful white woman join her wealthy black family. He used every single racist stereotype in the book, trying to paint me as the aggressive mastermind who pulled the strings behind the scenes. Victoria sobbed loudly, right on cue, burying her face in her hands to elicit maximum sympathy from the clearly biased judge. The judge slammed his wooden gavel, demanding order in the court before turning a highly critical eye in my direction. He allowed Montgomery absolute freedom to push this completely fabricated narrative without a single legal objection. It was sickening to watch the justice system actively reward a woman who was weaponizing her white tears to extort a black business owner. Montgomery finally called his star hostile witness to the stand. He loudly called my name, expecting me to walk up to the podium, shaking with fear while hiding behind a massive team of expensive corporate lawyers. He wanted to visually prove to the jury that I was a guilty, wealthy tyrant trying to bully an innocent, helpless bride. I stood up from the wooden bench, perfectly calm and completely unfazed. I did not bring Elias or any of my corporate attorneys up to the front of the courtroom with me. I walked down the center aisle, completely alone, wearing a sharp-tailored emerald suit. I carried absolutely nothing with me, except a single thick, heavy black binder filled with unredacted physical evidence. The entire courtroom fell incredibly silent as the heavy doors closed outside, and the gallery watched me confidently take my place on the witness stand. I placed my right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the absolute truth. I sat down in the leather chair and placed the heavy black binder directly on the wooden ledge in front of me. Montgomery approached the witness stand with a deeply arrogant and condescending smirk plastered completely across his face. He leaned casually against the wooden railing, fully expecting to break my composure within the first 5 minutes of his aggressive interrogation. He planned to ask me leading, manipulative questions designed to trap me into admitting I hated his client. He assumed I would get angry, raise my voice, and instantly become the hostile, aggressive stereotype he had just described to the biased jury. He thought he had the ultimate upper hand because the judge was clearly completely on his side. He had absolutely no idea that the thick black binder sitting right under his nose contained the exact digital forensic evidence that would send his sweet, innocent client straight to a federal prison cell. I looked directly into Montgomery's eyes and offered him a polite, chilling smile, completely ready for the absolute total destruction of the entire corrupt Sterling family to finally begin today inside this very courtroom. I was totally prepared to win this. Montgomery leaned against the wooden railing, placing his face uncomfortably close to mine. He let out a dramatic, condescending sigh, intended for the jury. "Is it not true, Miss Washington?" He began, his voice dripping with theatrical mockery, "that you spent your entire life feeling deeply inferior to your brother? Is it not absolutely true that you were so blindly jealous of my client and her pristine high society upbringing that you maliciously orchestrated the total destruction of her wedding day out of pure spite?" I did not raise my voice or give him the angry reaction he desperately needed. I simply opened the thick black binder resting in front of me. I looked directly at the judge, then turned my calm gaze back to the arrogant lawyer. "No, Mr. Montgomery," I replied, my voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom. "I did not orchestrate anything out of jealousy. I simply stopped paying for a fraudulent lifestyle. I am the sole owner of the hospitality group your client tried to exploit. I personally funded the $250,000 wedding until I discovered the groom embezzled $400,000 from my company payroll to buy your client her engagement ring." Montgomery, face flushed dark red. He stood straight, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Objection, Your Honor," he shouted. "The witness is making baseless, defamatory accusations against my client without a shred of legal proof." The judge peered down at me, his expression stern. "Miss Washington, you cannot make those statements in this courtroom unless you have hard, verifiable evidence to back them up." I smiled politely at the judge. "I absolutely do, Your Honor," I replied smoothly. I pulled the first set of documents from my black binder, handing them directly to the court bailiff. What the bailiff is handing you right now is a certified forensic audit conducted by an independent financial firm. It definitively proves that Marcus stole corporate funds to finance his fake billionaire persona and pay for Victoria Sterling's lavish demands. He was never a wealthy tech executive. He was simply a common thief living entirely on my stolen corporate dimes. The judge took the stack of papers from the bailiff, scanning the highlighted financial ledgers. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of paper as the judge turned the pages. Montgomery began to sweat nervously, his aggressive confidence faltering. He paced back to the plaintiff table where Victoria was sitting. Her fake innocent tears completely stopped, and she gripped the edge of the wooden table with white knuckles. Montgomery tried to pivot his strategy instantly. "Your Honor," he stammered loudly. "Even if her brother committed financial crimes, that does not excuse the defendant, malicious, targeted harassment of my innocent client. Victoria had absolutely no idea her husband was a fraud. She is a victim of his deceit." I turned the page in my binder. "That is also completely false," I announced loudly, cutting through Montgomery and his pathetic excuses. I pulled a second stack of documents from the binder. The bailiff immediately stepped forward to take them, handing the thick packet up to the judge. "Your Honor," I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "What you are looking at now is a series of highly classified emails sent between Victoria Sterling, her father Charles, and their private family attorneys, along with a secret illegal prenuptial agreement drafted months before the wedding." Montgomery lunged forward, objecting frantically, claiming the documents were inadmissible, but the judge completely ignored him, holding up a hand to silence the panicked lawyer. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading the highlighted emails. His face went from pale to a deep, furious crimson as he read the horrifying words Victoria and Charles had written. I did not wait for the judge to finish reading. I looked directly at the jury box and spoke clearly, outlining the sinister plot. "Those emails prove irrefutably that Victoria and Charles knew Marcus was broke from the beginning," I stated firmly. "Their master plan was to marry him, wait 6 months, then frame him for domestic abuse. They explicitly discussed using vicious racial stereotypes, knowing the media would blindly believe a crying wealthy white woman accusing a black man of violence once he was locked in a federal prison cell. Victoria planned to file a massive divorce settlement to legally steal half of my holding group because she mistakenly believed Marcus owned it. They colluded to commit massive wire fraud across state lines to bail out the bankrupt Sterling real estate empire." Victoria jumped up from her chair, shrieking loudly. She pointed at me, screaming that I illegally hacked her private servers and the emails were fake. She tried to squeeze out her signature white tears, sobbing that she was being framed by a jealous ghetto tyrant. But the magic was completely gone. The spell was broken. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down with terrifying force. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, and everyone in the courtroom jumped. "Silence!" the judge roared, his voice booming with righteous fury. He glared down at Victoria and Charles with pure, unadulterated disgust. The sympathetic grandfatherly demeanor he had shown Victoria at the beginning of the trial completely vanished, replaced by the wrath of a seasoned judge who realized he had been played for an absolute fool. "Sit down right now, Miss Sterling," the judge commanded coldly, "or I will hold you in contempt and have you thrown in a holding cell instantly." Victoria collapsed back into her wooden chair, her face buried in her hands, trembling with genuine terror. Montgomery stood completely frozen, staring at the floor, realizing his entire legal career was actively going up in flames. I sat comfortably in the witness stand, closing my heavy black binder with a soft, definitive thud. I walked into their trap unarmed and systematically dismantled their entire fraudulent existence, using nothing but their own malicious arrogance and a flawless trail of financial facts. The courtroom was mine. The courtroom was mine. The heavy silence that followed my final words felt incredibly suffocating for the desperate people sitting at the plaintiff table. They knew they had lost. The judge slowly took off his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. He looked down at the massive stack of undeniable evidence I had just handed him: the certified financial audits, the secret prenuptial agreement, and the highly classified emails detailing their malicious plot to frame my brother using vicious racial stereotypes simply to steal my corporate empire. The judge picked up his wooden gavel and gripped it tightly. His face was a mask of pure judicial fury. He looked directly at Montgomery and did not mince his words. He slammed the gavel down with absolute terrifying finality. He loudly declared that he was throwing out the entire civil lawsuit with extreme prejudice. He stated clearly for the official court record that the lawsuit was nothing but a malicious, frivolous extortion attempt built entirely on blatant perjury and fabricated evidence. Montgomery physically shrank back into his chair, completely defeated, knowing his legal career was effectively terminated. But the furious judge was nowhere near finished. He turned his sharp gaze toward Victoria and Charles, who were both trembling in their seats. The judge announced to the packed courtroom that he was not just dismissing the case. He was immediately referring Victoria, Charles, and Marcus directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He explicitly cited massive federal charges of criminal conspiracy, severe corporate embezzlement, intentional wire fraud across state lines, and egregious perjury in a court of law. Hearing those severe federal charges finally broke through the thick layer of sheer arrogance clouding my brother. Marcus suddenly understood the absolute catastrophic magnitude of his situation. He was not just broke and homeless anymore. He was going straight to a maximum security federal prison. He stood up from the defense table, his legs trembling so violently he could barely support his own physical weight. He looked frantically over at Victoria, hoping his white bride would somehow use her old money status to save him. Victoria was actively backing away from him, her face twisted in pure disgust, completely abandoning her sweet, innocent wife persona. She looked at Marcus like he was a diseased animal. Having absolutely no one else left to turn to, Marcus turned to look at me. He stumbled awkwardly across the courtroom aisle, falling heavily to his knees right next to the wooden gate separating the public gallery from the trial floor. Hot tears streamed rapidly down his face, soaking the collar of his cheap, ill-fitting suit. He reached his hands through the wooden slats, desperately begging me to save him from this nightmare. In front of the stern judge, the packed gallery, and the eager local press, Marcus finally admitted the pathetic, miserable truth out loud. He confessed loudly that he was absolutely nothing without me. He cried that I had built our entire successful lives, while he simply coasted on my massive achievements. He wept that our toxic mother Brenda had aggressively manipulated him his entire life. He sobbed that the wealthy Sterling family had maliciously used him as a disposable pawn. He begged me to remember that we shared the same blood. He pleaded for me to use my immense wealth to hire him an elite criminal defense team so he would not die in a federal prison cell. I sat perfectly still on the witness stand, looking down at the older brother, who had ruthlessly tormented me for my entire existence. I looked at the man who had happily allowed our mother to forge documents and steal my massive college fund. I looked at the man who had spent years mocking my brutal hard work, while actively spending my corporate money to impress a racist white family that secretly despised our very skin color. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or sorrow. My heart was completely shielded from his toxic manipulation after years of enduring his endless emotional abuse and sheer financial exploitation. I leaned forward, resting my hands calmly on the wooden rail of the witness box. I looked directly into his desperate, crying eyes, ensuring he saw absolutely no mercy reflecting back at him. I spoke clearly and deliberately, making sure the entire silent courtroom heard my final, ultimate verdict. "You made your bed," I said coldly, my voice devoid of any familial warmth. "Now lie in it. Now." The judge aggressively signaled to the courtroom security detail. Two large armed bailiffs immediately stepped forward from the shadows of the room. They grabbed Marcus by his upper arms, forcefully hoisting him off his knees. They pulled his arms sharply behind his back and securely fastened heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The loud metallic click echoed through the room. Marcus sobbed uncontrollably, screaming my name as the bailiffs marched him roughly toward the heavy metal door leading to the courthouse holding cells. At the plaintiff table, Victoria saw her fake husband being dragged away in chains and she panicked. She tried to quietly slip out the back wooden doors of the courtroom to escape the immediate fallout. The judge barked a harsh command from his high bench. Two more armed officers instantly intercepted her escape route. Victoria shrieked at the top of her lungs, violently kicking her expensive heels and fighting in her pale blue designer dress. She screamed that she was a prominent Sterling and that they had absolutely no legal right to touch a woman of her high society pedigree. The officers did not care about her wealth or her race. They forcefully pushed her against the wooden wall and handcuffed her right there in the middle of the crowded courtroom, officially arresting the crying bride for severe perjury and massive financial fraud. Charles Sterling watched his precious privileged daughter being violently dragged away in absolute sheer horror. The arrogant patriarch clutched his chest, gasping for air, as he suffered a complete mental and emotional meltdown right in front of the eager press cameras. His century-old aristocratic legacy was permanently destroyed, completely reduced to absolute ashes. As Charles collapsed into his wooden chair, grasping for his heart medication, my corporate legal team smoothly walked up to his table. They formally served his panicked defense lawyers with the final ultimate asset seizure documents. Every single remaining commercial property, luxury estate, and private bank account belonging to the disgraced Sterling family was legally and permanently seized at that exact moment. I sat on the witness stand and watched their entire corrupt empire burn to the ground, knowing I was the one who happily lit the match. I drove to the county detention center 2 days after the spectacular courtroom victory. I walked through the heavy metal doors, feeling a profound sense of finality. I sat down in the bleak visitation room, staring at the thick, smudged glass separating the inmates from the visitors. The heavy steel door on the other side clicked open and Brenda walked in. She was wearing a baggy, bright orange jumpsuit, and her previously perfect hair was completely unraveled. Even in a county jail cell, she still carried herself with that deeply toxic, blinding arrogance. She picked up the plastic black telephone receiver and glared at me through the dirty glass. She did not offer a single apology. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for forging my father and his signature or stealing my massive college trust fund. Instead, she immediately began giving me aggressive demands. Brenda leaned into the glass and commanded me to hire her the most expensive criminal defense attorney in the state. She yelled that it was my absolute fault that Marcus was sitting in a federal holding cell and that Charles Sterling had suffered a massive heart attack. She told me I needed to stop throwing this childish tantrum and use my corporate wealth to fix the catastrophe I had maliciously created. She actually had the profound audacity to claim that as my biological mother, I owed her my complete absolute loyalty. She demanded that I write a massive check to pay her exorbitant bail so she could go home and figure out how to save her precious golden boy from a lengthy prison sentence. I sat perfectly still, holding the plastic receiver to my ear. I listened to her frantic, entitled rambling and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, and definitely no guilt. For my entire life, I had desperately craved the warm, unconditional love of a mother. I had worked myself to the absolute bone trying to prove I was worthy of her basic respect. I spent years silently enduring her cruel mockery and her endless financial exploitation, believing that if I just became successful enough, she would finally see my true value. Looking at her now, I finally understood the absolute, undeniable truth. Brenda was never going to love me because she was fundamentally incapable of loving anyone but herself and her pathetic extension, Marcus. She had viewed me as nothing more than a disposable tool, a convenient scapegoat, and a limitless bank account. I looked directly into her angry, desperate eyes. I calmly told her that she was completely out of her mind if she thought I would ever spend a single penny to save her from the exact miserable fate she built with her own 2 hands. I explained that she stole my past, but she was never going to touch a single second of my future ever again. I told her that she chose Marcus, and now she gets to share his exact criminal legacy. Brenda began to scream violently into the telephone, slamming her hand against the thick glass barrier. She shrieked that I was an evil, ungrateful monster, and that God would punish me for abandoning my own flesh and blood. I simply placed the plastic receiver back onto the metal hook, completely cutting off her toxic venom. I stood up from the metal chair, turned my back on her screaming face, and walked out of the visitation room. I walked out of the concrete building, finally cutting the ultimate heavy cord of toxic family guilt forever. Fast forward, exactly 6 months. The cool autumn breeze swept beautifully across the lush green lawns of the Magnolia Estate Resort. The very same luxury property where my family had tried to publicly humiliate me was now the magnificent venue for a massive, joyous celebration. I was hosting a spectacular evening gala to celebrate the massive international expansion of my hospitality empire. The grand ballroom was decorated flawlessly with vibrant flowers and warm ambient lighting. But this time the guest list was completely different. There were no fake aristocratic families, no arrogant real estate developers, and absolutely no toxic blood relatives trying to aggressively steal my joy. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, completely surrounded by my beautiful chosen family. Elias, my brilliant corporate lawyer, was laughing near the bar with my dedicated financial team. Harrison, the billionaire venture capitalist who had publicly stood by my side, was happily toasting to our record-breaking profits. My loyal employees, true mentors, and deeply supportive friends filled the room with genuine warmth and absolute authentic love. The energy in the room was absolutely electric and completely devoid of any dark, hidden agendas. I was no longer the isolated sister sitting in the dark shadows near the kitchen doors. I was the undisputed queen of my own massive, successful empire, standing proudly in the bright, radiant light. I picked up a crystal glass of imported champagne and walked confidently up the steps to the main stage. I did not need to snatch the microphone from anyone else because this entire stage belonged exclusively to me. I looked out at the sea of smiling, supportive faces who truly respected my brutal hard work and my undeniable worth. The harsh journey from being the family scapegoat to becoming a powerful corporate mogul had been incredibly painful but absolutely necessary. I had finally learned the ultimate critical lesson about wealth boundaries and self-respect. I turned to look directly into the camera lens, delivering my final empowering message to anyone who has ever been completely devalued by the people who were supposed to love them the most. Never let anyone hold the mic at the party of your life. Cut the check and cut them off. If this story gave you the strength to finally walk away from your own toxic burdens, please hit that subscribe button right now. Remember, your true immense value is never determined by those who are completely blind to your bright, shining light. The ultimate lesson from this story is that biological ties do not excuse toxic exploitation or entitle anyone to your success. True family is built on mutual respect, not financial manipulation or conditional love. When confronted with betrayal, attempting to buy affection, or keeping the peace only fuels further abuse. You must aggressively reclaim your narrative, establish uncompromising boundaries, and unapologetically sever ties with people who view you merely as a convenient resource. Your inherent worth is never defined by their inability to appreciate it. If this video empowered you, please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories.